理解できぬな。人類という種のためか。ならば世の行為はむしろ強力だと言っておく。例えばお前たちの社会には国境という縄張りに似た仕切りがあろう。境の右では子供が飢えて死に、左では何もしないクズが全てを持っている。狂気の沙汰だ。世が壊してやる。そして与えよう。平等とは言えぬまでも理不尽な差のない世界を。
Damn, what a badass. Today I'm going to be talking about Hunter x Hunter. If you haven't already watched the show, I highly recommend you do, as this video will contain massive spoilers. But once you've done that and had ample recovery time, feel free to come back and watch this video so I can send you back to the hole you've just crawled out of. Alright, you know the drill. Let's get into it. What I'm going to be talking about was a question prompted by Macquarrie, the king of the ants. He said that there are some humans worth keeping alive, such as Komugi and Netero.
わずかながら生かすに足る人間がいることを知った。あの娘がそうだ。お主にも同じものを感じる。
It got me thinking into what this might be. What is it that Macquarrie sees in them that makes them valuable to him? And from this question, it led me down an analysis which I will call the hidden existentialism of Hunter x Hunter. So what is it they share? They both have an insanely strong connection to what they do. They both embody deeply existential and human characters. They are what you might call a realized human being, or in philosophy jargon, ontological certainty. Both Komugi and Netero split from the original path they were presented with when they were born. Komugi, instead of going down the same path her family has gone and just working on the farm her whole life trying to help, she decided to pick Gungi.
私、本当に軍技の他は何もできなくて、要は軍技に生かされているわけです。
In the show, when she describes her context, she explains how Gungi is not an easy game to earn money with until you become a professional. So basically, you have to be best in the world to get anywhere with it. That's what she did. Despite her being blind, making me think of another topic surrounding the term health and how when you look at it particularly, it's a very abstract term. There is no universal healthiness. It, as Immanuel Kant said, as for health, we find ourselves in an embarrassing position. One can feel well, to judge by their comfortable feeling of vitality, but you can never know that you are healthy. And epistemologically, why that term even existed is debated. But for someone like Georges Canguilhem, a prominent philosopher, scientist, epistemologist, Komugi would represent someone who, despite an organic disorder, you can still create a new equilibrium or near equilibrium where your various needs can be met, which is very important for Canguilhem and important for the analogous nature of this with Komugi. She devoted all of her life to Gungi and has a connection with it that makes her more connected with her being, her humanness. Well, her playing Gungi is an expression of that humanness. Another integral aspect to how she's this existential character is what she wanted to bet with the king Macquarrie.
いつも私がかけているものではダメですか？
なんだと？何をだ？
命です。
This isn't because she doesn't value her life whatsoever, but quite the opposite. Central to existentialist thought is this notion of temporality. But because it would take years to fully explain, I'll summarize an aspect of it. the distinction between anticipation, vorlaufen, and expectation, erwarten, of death. To quickly hit you with some deepness, when you're expecting death, you view death as a, fact. But it is not death as a fact which is terrifying. Everything dies, and I will too. And there's something consoling about that thought. What is far more disturbing is the relation between a life and a death in a life which understands it can end at any moment and whose future, therefore, is always held out into its own disappearance. Such a recognition affects every one of my possibilities. In terms of their content, they might not be any different, but how I relate to this content will be very different. What anticipation of my death as a possibility reveals to me is my life. This is what a guy called Martin Heidegger means by freedom. It is not the arbitrary choice of any possibility, but choosing who you already are, but this time as your own choice, and not just because others have chosen for you. Sorry about that. Both Netero and Komugi represent this sentiment to the fullest. They live in anticipation of their deaths, not expectation. How they relate to what they do is different because it's purely authentic. Whether they live or die doesn't matter as long as they're doing the thing they themselves chose to do, rather than what others have told them they should do. For Komugi, it's gungi. For Netero, it's fighting or martial arts. Not because he adores conflict. If he did that, he would be visualized and written as much more evil character than he was. Instead, he was probably one of the most laid-back and joyous characters in the whole show. He explains how grateful he is for the moments which have led up to this point where he can fight all out with an opponent who has an ability to defeat him. Even his final move coddles the opponent with unbridled love. Even his shirt says heart. The final connection I see between these two is another existential concept which is key to any Nietzschean or Hegelian understanding of the human being. That's the notion of becoming. In the show, you see these two individuals, three including Meruem, who are the best in their field. From the outside looking in, there is no more for them to do or learn. They've reached the peak and could be described as complete. But one of the essences of Nietzsche's philosophy is that humans are temporal beings, not confined to the given. More clearly, the human is the being constituted as unfinished or incomplete no matter what stage in life you're at. But as humans, we have the passion, the urge, the tendency to persist and continue and overcome the limits we thought we never could. And this is what's seen in Komugi, and even described by Meruem when they're playing gungi. And with Netero, when Meruem sees him smiling when he's meant to be a dying old man on the floor. One of them is in a more positivistic light. The other shows the dark reality of how this continuous evolution to overcome oneself and overcome the other really bears out. Which brings me onto the final aspect of this investigation, and how all these plot points create an almost meta-plot to be reflected onto the world in which we inhabit. The Rose. To me, this is one of the most interesting scenes and developments I've seen through this entire series. Whilst watching this part of the Chimera Ant arc, I kept thinking, why did Yoshihiro Togahashi put this in? Why, in a show which is meant to follow the classic shonen type style with epic fights intertwined with a storyline of growth and progress, would the final move in an all-in-all outstanding fight be a bomb? Why spend so long in an episode with some of the grittiest art style I had seen in the show thus far, showing us this? This isn't a depiction of just the Hunter x Hunter world anymore. When watching this for the first time, I was wide-eyed, full immersion mode until my eyes started watering. It made me realise that the whole arc wasn't as it first seemed. Just as you think this momentous fight between Netero and Meruem is finally over, we get a crucial exposition on how the bombs came about. This is the thing. It doesn't tell us exactly how or why this is connected to what we've just seen. It just gives us a vivid depiction and therefore critique of the outcome of such a view of human becoming. How this urge to surpass is beyond good and evil. Like, you know, that philosopher who I mentioned earlier, Martin Heidegger, despite his groundbreaking work in the field of ontology and phenomenology, he ended up being a Nazi. This is what I think Hunter x Hunter, especially here, did differently to other animes. It built you up with Komegi and Netero, and even the whole show displaying the attributes I've already mentioned, such as becoming authenticity, anticipation versus expectation of death, and evolving past your current self. Which, in a vacuum, as most animes and fictional stories are, can display what these attributes look like in a more or less positivistic light. And we could say we got to see this with Komegi. But what Togahashi does is pull it out of the vacuum and plops it in a normative or real-world light. It answers the question of how is this conception of the human being really panned out? This madman critiques the medium he's completely enveloped in. He shows us that despite the power in ontological certainty, it disregards the other. In a world living as a human, we also live with the certainty that other humans also exist and are embedded in the world just like us. But how do we relate to our fellow humans? That is what the field of ethics really is. What is my relation to the other human beings in virtue of them being a human just like me? And this is a more modern critique of ontology which happened post-World War II. If we can have this almost transcendent idea of what it means to be human, how is it possible that things such as
朋友是一个坚韧不拔的纪录片，在香港这座城市的设置。主演
This is why the conception of what it means to be human in a purely ontological or becoming sense can and should be criticized. When looking at the whole story of the human race and the human race currently, I think Togahashi depicts it beautifully, giving a juxtapositional scene of Netero.
ありのメルエル、お前さんは何にも分かっちゃいねえよ。人間の底すらない進化を。
Fully showing that the infinite potentiality of the human race is not always bared out in a positive way, but instead shows the capacity for us to be inhuman. The most despicable acts of violence and hatred are bore out and unravelled in our history. And just as you think that this side of things is over, it hits you again with the question, how are human and ants different? And it responds saying, humans are worse.
ありと何一つ変わらない。いや、それ以上に。
this vivid depiction of what could look like an artist's rendition of real life is only interrupted by the narrator saying, "The rose was poisonous, and it was a demonic weapon more inhumane than any other." So what Meruem sees in Komugi and Netero is their humanness in its entirety. The capacity to do both good and bad through this authentic expression of their humanity. But what we see is a warning. I'm not saying don't have an authentic and unalienated connection with your work. I mean, this is another central theme in Hegelian and Marxist philosophy, the idea of Wirklich, which originated in Hegel and then was expanded on by Marx, which is the idea that you can fully express your being and become close to it by doing work which you are connected to, rather than alienated labour which gradually kills your soul. But there is no morality or ethics in this explanation, which is exactly the critique that Togahashi explains. To round off then, there's a wide interplay of so many different ideas and concepts in this arc and Hunter x Hunter as a whole. I would love to do more videos which look at this show or others a bit more deeply and see what's there to reflect back into our world. I should just mention that this is my first ever video I've actually made, so I apologise if the editing is a bit off and the sound gets a bit weird sometimes. But I hope that if you made it to this point, you might have learned something or were entertained for 20 minutes or so. If that's the case, then it'd be sick if you dropped a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. By the way, I'll leave all my references in the description and any music that I might have used. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.
I got broads in Atlanta, just to put me in the family. Credit cards and the scammers, getting the list in the van. Legacy, family, Nancy look like a panda. Going up like a Montana, 100 killers on their hands. Legacy, family, Nancy, pockets full, down, selling ball. Then on the match like Randy.